Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for registering for this talk, and we're really excited to have you tonight. We had some great turnout for this talk, so we know that there's a lot of interest from our community. But I'm Ria Cohn. I'm the conservation coordinator here at the Swanner Preserve and Eco Center in Park City. And I'm going to give you a brief intro of kind of Swanner and our programs before I pass the mic off to Elizabeth Cohen from Summit County Extension. And she will introduce our speaker tonight. So our goal at Swanner is to preserve, educate, and nurture both the land and our community and strive to connect people with nature, both big nature and tonight's topic, more like small nature. We'd also like to recognize that the Swanner Preserve and Eco Center resides on the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone and the Ute Indian tribe. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty, history, and experiences. So before I pass you off, I'd like to thank Summit County RAPTAX for supporting our Walks, Talks, and Workshop series. And I'll go over a couple of quick logistics for tonight. So we are recording this presentation. So if anybody has to step out early or step away for a few minutes, we'll be sending that out. So you'll be able to catch up or share with others. We'll also send out a follow-up email with a survey, which we hope you participate in, and any relevant links and resources shared during the presentation. If you have questions, type them into the chat or Q&A, and we'll facilitate them to our presenter tonight. I may jump into the presentation with relevant questions from the audience, but there's also going to be time at the end for a Q&A. So with that, I'll pass you off to Elizabeth.
Hi, I am Elizabeth Cohen, and I am the USU Extension faculty for Agriculture and Natural Resources, and I am based in the Colville office. USU Extension, the mission is to provide research-based programs and resources with the goal of improving the lives of individuals, families, and communities throughout Utah. And our presenter tonight is Dr. Nikki Fry. She's an associate extension professor in the field of wildlife biology, stationed at Cedar City in southern Utah. She has a special interest in the field of human-wildlife conflicts. She's worked for USU Extension in the field of wildlife biology with an emphasis in human-wildlife conflicts since 2004. She received her undergraduate degree in wildlife management from West Virginia University and her master's and PhD in wildlife biology from Utah State University.
Great, thank you guys for having me. Let me go ahead and share my screen and I will get us started tonight. I'm really excited to start this talk. Sounds like this is the time of year that everybody starts to have problems with all of our small little critters that live amongst us. Tonight, specifically, let's talk about controlling squirrels, voles, and pocket gophers in our yards and towns. This is different than a talk I would give for agricultural producers. It will still have some information that's relevant to agricultural producers, but the tips and the tricks that I'm going to present are things that I feel are safer for those of us that live around people and pets, and just trying to keep everybody safe. So what are we talking about? Let's start there. We had a quick discussion before this workshop just to make sure that I knew what you guys were talking about. On the left, we have a vole. In the middle picture, we have ground squirrels. And then on the right, we have pocket gophers. So those are the three animals that we're going to focus on tonight. I'm going to go through each animal individually and talk about their biology and then management strategies to handle them when they become conflict species on our lands. And after each species, I'll provide a little bit of time in case you have any questions right away that you need to ask me before you forget. There'll also be time after I get through all three species to ask questions. So let's jump in. Let's start looking at our voles. Voles are often thought to be mice. So a lot of us that don't work with animals on a daily basis get mice and voles confused. We want to make sure that we know the difference because the management tactics we use are species specific, and it's based on their biology and the way that they move through the environment throughout the year. So if we're talking about voles, we want to look for animals that have their ears below their head. You can see by the arrow that that ear does not go above their head. They have a pointy nose, like most mice. They also have small feet, like most mice. But if you were to look over here, they have a very short tail. Okay, so when we're talking about a mouse, we've got ears that stick up above their head and then tails that are about the same size as their body. With voles, you're not going to see that. And then voles move above the ground, and that's something that can help distinguish them from other species and from other management strategies. Voles are ubiquitous throughout Utah, and we have 8 different species in Utah that live in different habitat types. So the type of vole that you have might just depend on where you're living, but they kind of do the same thing. So it doesn't really matter for this talk what species that we're really dealing with here. So depending on the species, they are 4.5 to 6 inches long, and they're active year round, and they're diurnal. So I put arrows there because this is something that will help you identify whether or not it's a vole or a mouse. Mice are not active year round unless they're those house mice that are living in your house, and mice are nocturnal. So if you see something moving around in the field in winter, in the day, you have a vole. Okay, so that's how we can use biology to try to figure out what kind of species we're dealing with. Voles generally eat grass, seeds, fungus, and bark, and they're mostly going to forage above the ground. This, again, is going to help us come up with the management strategies we use. Most of the damage that we see in Utah are from the habit of voles eating that bark. So if you have an ornamental shrub, or even if you have some nursery plants, you can see that damage. We generally will see them eating the bark in the wintertime. And some of the other damage that we might see are these runs that we have through the grass. And they can, and I'll show you a photo of those later. Voles are breeding throughout the year. They're sexually mature at 3 weeks old, and they can have 2 to 3 litters a year. Generally, the breeding season is May through October, but if it's warmer weather or they are in a more favorable environment, they can keep breeding year round. So you think about the fact that they're breeding a month later, they're having babies. Those babies a month later can breed. You can see how you might come up with a really large vole population in short order. So these guys cycle through the year with that large breeding population, but you can also have cycles of them every 2 to 5 years where we have a boom cycle where you feel like all you see are voles, but then there'll be a bust cycle where there aren't very many around. So depending on where we are in that cycle, you may or may not have any vole problems, and they're existing in your environment without you even knowing about it. Unlike some of our commensal rodents like rats and old world mice, voles are solitary except when they're breeding. So you're not going to, like you see on those YouTube videos, you're not going to like open a shed door and have these voles like spilling out the shed door. They're generally solitary, but because there are a lot of them, you could still have a significant problem. How do you know if you have voles? Well, here's some things that you can look for. Vole holes, like this photo on the left, don't have any soil around them. So pocket gophers and ground squirrels and a lot of other burrowing animals will have piles of dirt around their holes. Voles don't have that. They have a little burrow system where they can den and keep safe from predators and keep safe from the elements, but it's not an extensive underground system. So you're not going to see a lot of soil around the hole. The hole itself is about 1.5 to 2 inches in diameter at the most. a lot of times you can't really even see the holes until you mow your grass, or in this case, they cut down the wheat and saw all the voles. Another really common phenomenon is this photo on the right-hand side, where the voles, which are again active year-round, tunneled through the grass under the snow. So they're using the snow as protection from predators, and they're continuing their activity. So as they run and run and run, they create these trampled out patterns in the grass. So this is the time of year I usually get a lot of phone calls, because the snow melts out of people's yards and backyards, and they see all these tracks in the snow and realize they have a vole problem. And then finally, you could see this pattern of tree damage here in the center picture. And this is really indicative of vole damage. If you were to look in really close, you could see the teeth where the vole has taken off the bark to get that cambium layer underneath that is highly nutritious. And so once again, they're tunneling under the snow above the ground, and they're able to get at that trees. So how do we manage them? Well, I like to think of things as either lethal options or non-lethal options. And there's a lot of different things you can do for both. I think that if you have a low population of voles, you can try some of these non-lethal options. But as those voles become more and more abundant, you're going to want to try some of these lethal options. And then people with persistent problems tend to have to use both, a strategy of lethal and non-lethal. So let's go through these. I'm going to start with the lethal options, mostly just because that's the quick remedy, but it's certainly not in order of preference. It's based on your preference and what you think you need for your yard. So one of the quickest things we can do is trap. And to trap voles, we just use a common mouse trap, like you see here on the right-hand side. These are just Victor snap traps, suitable size for mice. And what you want to do is you just put the trap down in the run that the vole is created. You don't have to bait it. You don't have to do anything specific. Just leave it down, and that vole will scoot from its hole in the ground to its food source and unexpectedly run against that trap and get caught. The interesting thing about the Victor snap traps, Victor's just a name brand. I'm not endorsing that name brand, but it's just a common term, is that you can actually cover it. And that's important if you live in an area with children or people that can't make safe decisions for themselves, and dogs and other pets that might get curious. So in the picture on the left, all we've done is taken some corrugated cardboard. You can even take a cereal box. You can take some aluminum gutter tubing, anything that shape, put it over the snap traps and just stake it in place. And then within 12 hours or so, you should be able to get your vole. So I would recommend checking it every couple of hours so that you don't have a trapped deceased vole hanging out in your yard, which will attract more animals to your yard. So yeah, you have to be really careful using those traps if you have curious little children or curious pets, but you can make it relatively safe. The good news with the snap trap is if you do have a pet get stuck in one, it's not going to damage them. It'll hurt and it will scare them, but your pet will probably be okay. But they can break small fingers, so you want to be very careful. The next most common option is the use of poison baits. Poison baits are good to use when you don't know exactly where the voles are coming from, or you're starting to see a larger population of voles, or you're seeing an increase in health and safety to get the population down fast, in which case poison baits might be the best option. I really caution against using poison baits in and around structures with other pets, poultry, and children, but there are ways to make it safer. First, you can use a commercial bait box, and that's on the photo on the bottom right-hand side. It's important that you use the one that has a lock on it and keep that key, okay? Make sure you're using bait that's labeled for use on voles. So in this top right-hand picture here, we have an example of a bait that you can get on Amazon. And it says it kills rats, mice, and meadow voles. Meadow voles are throughout Utah. I will caution that meadow voles themselves as a species are imperiled in Utah, probably because of loss of habitat. So use cautiously and only when needed. Do not use bait listed for pocket gophers. I put this out there specifically because I often run into people using pocket gopher bait to control voles. And pocket gophers and voles eat differently. They're attracted to different things, and they have a different metabolism. So that bait's going to operate differently on that species. So it could be inhumane to use a bait that's not registered for use on that species because it makes them really, really sick but doesn't kill them. Or it could just be ineffective. That is just not going to work on that animal. When using these vole bait boxes, please make sure that you're using the block bait. If you use a grain bait, anyone that picks up that bait box will cause the grain bait to fall out. And that grain bait will be poisonous to any animal or child or person that accidentally eats it. So again, this is something that you want to use cautiously and judiciously, but it does work. When placing the bait boxes, you want to place them in an area that provides that animal with shelter, something that would be attractive. So if you find the vole hole, you might find some shelter close by that you could place the bait box in, and that would encourage the vole to investigate and find that bait. Just placing it in open sight in the open ground is not going to entice a vole, because a vole is going to be very cautious. It's a prey item that's eaten by pretty much everything. So you don't want to just toss it out next to your house or toss it out next to your shed. You want to place it someplace that looks inviting to the vole and close to the run or close to the damage that you've seen that vole cause. So I'd like to provide this slide just to be, I guess, fully informative about the poisons. It can be a little bit overwhelming. So we'll talk about this with each species. So we have anticoagulants. Anticoagulants cause the capillaries in the body to essentially leak. And so they can be a slower acting poison. In the case of those that have multiple doses, like difascinone and chlorfascinone, the animal needs to eat it a couple times in order to get a lethal dose. And then with the Verdiflicum, bromadiolone, difethiolone, and difenicum, they're single dose, so the animal just needs to do it once, eat it once, and then it will have that effect. So again, these are going to be formulated for a small sized animal. If a larger sized animal were to get into that bait box and get a little bit of that, any of these anticoagulants, it probably won't be lethal. The animal will get very, very sick, but you will have time to take it to the vet and hopefully save it. On the right-hand side, we have the non-anticoagulant poisons. They work on the central nervous system, or they block uptake of certain vitamins that work on the cellular level. And then the fumigants, which are gases that are toxic to all mammals. So the non-anticoagulant poisons that you'll come across when trying to manage voles are zinc phosphide, trimethylin, and cholecalciferol. And so you might find any of those in those bait blocks that you're looking at. Just know that these are highly toxic. So they are extremely lethal to all mammals, not just voles. And with fumigants, there are a few fumigants on the market for voles. I'm not really going to get into them because they are lethal to all mammals. And so I don't want you to use them around your house. In fact, they're labeled such that you should not be able to use them around your house or sheds or anywhere public. And since that's where you generally have vole issues, although there may be a few people on this webinar right now that might have some field issues, fumigants aren't really safe to use around the house. Okay, so we can do some things that are non-poisonous with voles fairly effectively. Voles like to live in the fallow areas around the fields, any area maybe that hasn't been pruned out. There's patches, dense patches of leaves, etc. on them. So if you just clean those out, you'll reduce your vole population. Removing wood piles will reduce that vole population. Another thing you can do is keep the grass mowed low so that they're not using your grass as shelter to run from point A to point B. During the year, you can mulch up to 2 feet around your tree trunks for your larger trees, even for your saplings. And again, the vole is not going to want to cover bare ground. So as long as there's someplace else for that vole to go, the vole will reduce its activity around your trees. I have heard of people using crown vetch as a border plant. So you could put crown vetch around a garden or around your yard, and apparently it repels the voles, and so that might help as well. I like to show this picture because this is my friend's garden in Idaho, and she just went a little overkill, but I love it. And so you can see here, she's removed, for the vole, she's removed all cover, removed all shelter. And then she's done a couple other things like burying some black corrugated steel down a few inches below the ground so that burrowing animals can't get through there. She also has some chicken wire here so that the rabbits and the deer can't get in. So she's really covering all of her bases. But you can see this is not an inviting place to be if you're a small prey species. So by changing the habitat, you can just change the desire of that small animal to even want to be in your yard. Some other things you can do if it's just a low density of voles: rake over the grass where there's a run. If you just rake it over and sort of fluff it up a little bit, that grass will grow back in. So it's not a permanent damage situation. And again, adding a little bit of fertilizer will make that grass grow back. So you can do a bit without actually having to kill them if the population is low. You just have to keep monitoring it because they are reproducing quickly. They can have that boom cycle. So to keep them from burrowing under, and we don't have a lot of burrowing vole activity, you want to put any of your exclusion, like your mesh. You can use corrugated steel or corrugated aluminum. You could also just use hardware cloth or soft mesh and place that at like 6 inches below the ground, about 12 inches above the ground. The 12 inches above the ground is to protect you in the winter time. Remember, they are still active in the winter and you're using that snow as cover. So you want to be able to exclude those voles even through the winter, especially with your tree species. So kind of bringing it all together here for the voles, most damage occurs in the wintertime. And that's through the eating of the bark that you see here in this picture, or creating those repetitive runs through your grass. So most of your mitigation should occur in the fall. So all that, the non-lethal stuff that you want to do to keep the voles from damaging your property in the wintertime. So mow the grass, clear out your fallow areas. If you've got ditch that controls your water, make sure that gets burned out. You can protect the trees with the mesh around the trunks, remove all your border vegetation. And if you already have trees that are there, you can very easily just dig a trench and put the mesh down in there and then backfill, and it'll work just fine. But if you have new trees that you're planting in the fall, you can go ahead and put that mesh in at the same time. Just be careful about the population, always be monitoring it, especially once you start doing control, and look for that new generation of birth to come out and decide whether or not you need to do lethal control. You can do lethal control year round. It's just harder to do when the snow's on the ground. So that's why I recommend doing preventative care in the fall. And then once spring comes and the snow melts, or if you get a warm year like this year where there's not a lot of snow, you can then do the lethal control according to label directions and things like that throughout the year. We do have a lot of fact sheets that can help you with your whole problem. So we'll provide you with a link through the USU extension system that can give you more detailed information on each method that you want to use. So if you want to do a lethal control using toxicants, we have more information that can give you detailed information about that. And I don't know if you guys can see me, but I can start holding things up if you can see me, but I don't think you can. Okay, so with that, if we want to have some questions, we can have some questions specifically to voles. If the host wants to do that.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions specifically about voles.
I have a question. Are there any poisons that are safer for secondary kills, like if another animal eats the vole that's been poisoned?
So those second generation anticoagulants that I had listed on that page, those are the ones that are supposed to be safer. So anything where the animal has to eat more than one dose, that's going to be safer for a non-target species. But none of it is foolproof. So there's nothing that if it's poisonous to a vole, it won't be poisonous to another vertebrate.
And that's for vertebrates that get into the actual poison pellets. What about for animals that eat the vole itself?
So those that are labeled for use in Utah have already been tested against.
So there aren't any that are approved that in Utah that can do secondary kills?
Yeah, so all the ones that are labeled for use in Utah are safe for secondary kills. So if an eagle or a hawk were to eat that dead animal, that eagle or hawk should be okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for clarifying that, because it's definitely.
No worries. I was confused about it, so I just wanted to clarify. Also, I have a friend who works for the ASPCA pet poison control, and she wants everybody to save or take a picture of the label of any poison, because inevitably somebody's going to get into it and nobody ever remembers what they bought or what it is. And it really helps the ER vet out if you know what you bought.
Yes. And so here's the thing, and I forgot to mention this. I think I probably have it on my pocket gopher slide. there are a lot of toxicants out there. And if you go to Amazon.com and just buy your poison, you could get anything. You could get things that are legal in Brazil, but illegal in the United States and not for label use in Utah. So I really suggest that what you do buy, you buy at your local store, and then still check the label to make sure that it's labeled for use in Utah. And if you have any questions, you can always email me and I will help you figure that out. Sometimes labeling can be really confusing. And then sometimes trying to figure out what's legal for a resident versus a nuisance control officer, it can just be hard.
There's one more question. Do voles ever seek shelter in basements or garages, or do they just stay outside?
Voles definitely seek shelter in basements and garages. Probably not as much basements, but depending on how old your house is and how old the basement is, totally. So yeah, they can get into your garage and find some shelter. It's not going to be the problem that you see with mice and rats, but because they generally like to be outside, but they can accidentally find their way into your garage and then decide to make shelter there. So I wouldn't exclude it, but it's definitely not something that we commonly have to deal with.
Are there any concerns with crown vetch being an invasive plant that's hard to eradicate once it's established? I looked on the Utah noxious weed list and it's not listed, but I'm not familiar with that particular plant.
I am not familiar with that plant as well. I don't think it is that species of vetch is noxious invasive. But I only listed because somebody in Utah suggested it. I've never used it. I've never seen data on it. So it's something that some people have commonly used. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, but it's something that I've never done research on. Certainly the idea of using some sort of plant or border that voles don't feel comfortable going through has been well researched. So if we're not really sure about crown vetch in the central Utah area, then I would say use mulch or rocks or some sort of xeriscaping.
Do voles eat the roots of saplings, or do they just eat the bark?
Voles can eat the roots of saplings. That's not necessarily the damage that we often see. Mostly they're foraging above ground. So the damage we see is going to be them eating the bark. But they can eat the roots of saplings. That's just not normally what they do.
That's all our questions for this section.
Okay, good. Well, now that I know you guys can actually see me, I'll hold some things up. So let's see. Let's move on then, if my computer lets me. My computer doesn't want to let me move. There we go. Okay, so let's move on to pocket gophers. Pocket gophers are an animal that's, again, throughout Utah, but we don't usually see it because it spends 95% of its time underground. So you could be very, very lucky if you ever see a live one. But let's walk through what to look for and how do you know that it's a pocket gopher. Whenever I talk to people that aren't really familiar with them, I usually just say pocket gophers are like moles, but they live west of the Rockies. So in the eastern United States, you have moles. The western United States, you have pocket gophers. They do the same thing. They form the same function. But of course, they have different life history traits that make them different species. So in general, pocket gophers have really small ears. Sometimes you can't really even see the ear. It's just kind of in there with the fur. Very blunt nose with longer whiskers, tiny little eyes compared to the size of their body. Then they have large back feet. They have large front feet too, but they have very large back feet that are used for digging. Why they're called pocket gophers is because they actually have fur-lined pockets in their cheeks. So they'll come out above the ground, usually not very far. I have it in my notes here, probably 150 square yards is their total range. So they'll go out, they'll forage, they'll shove alfalfa, which is their preferred forage, but also other grasses, into those cheeks, go back down underground, and they have a little storage room that they'll put it in for later. 99% of their movement is underground. They have extensive burrow systems. They can dig up to 6 feet an hour in really tillable soil. So I guess that kind of puts Utah out of the equation because we don't have highly tillable soils, right? But generally speaking, they love farmland because the farmers till the soil. And then of course, it just makes the pocket gophers' lives a lot easier. So they move underground. They have their babies underground. Most of their foraging is underground. They eat the roots and tubers that they discover underground in their burrow systems. They can eat roots and tubers in your garden, and they will also eat the roots of trees and saplings. So much so that sometimes when you get a pocket gopher, I've seen cases where somebody thinks they have a tree that's dead because of drought or something, but then when we dig it up, there's no roots left. So it was basically just a standing stick in the ground. There's 2 common species in Utah, the Batas and the northern pocket gopher. To like the untrained eye, they look the same. They kind of do the same thing. So we just kind of talk about them as one entity. They're about 6 to 8 inches long. They are active year round. So put an arrow there because it's important to remember that you can get pocket gopher damage throughout the year. They're mostly going to be active in the spring and the fall because that's when the soils are easier to burrow through. Nobody wants to burrow through frozen soil. And in the summertime, the soil is very dry, so tunnels can collapse. But that doesn't mean they won't be active. They're just less active. They do have a crepuscular, like a circadian rhythm. So they do like wake up for so many hours and go to sleep for so many hours, just like us. But just like us, they're active day and night. So they're not nocturnal or they're not diurnal. They're just sort of active throughout the 24-hour time period. And that's because they live underground. So it doesn't really matter to them if the sun's up or not. So, but of course they want to be out grabbing their forage outside of the burrow at dawn and dusk. So that's when you're more likely to see them out of their burrow system. So again, they're eating these plants, grasses, shrub and tree leaves, roots inside their tunnels. They will pull it inside. But we often really see pocket gophers more as an agricultural pest. So a lot of our damage management ideas are for things on a large scale agricultural setting. That being said, we have a lot of pocket gopher issues in people's backyards. My cover photo for this workshop was damage caused by a pocket gopher in a piece of property that was maybe, gosh, I don't even know, 30 yards by 50 yards at most. So it was, I mean, it can be some pretty small property that gets pocket gopher damage. Again, they really like alfalfa. So if you're living in an area near alfalfa, you're probably going to have more pocket gopher damage just by proximity. So pocket gophers take a little bit longer to become sexually mature. They are sexually mature at 3 to 6 months. They have one breeding season, so this is different than the voles. So they generally will breed April-ish. The males will run about trying to find females. They may actually burrow more to try to find the females underground. There can be some transferal above ground, but not usually. They do have 5 to 7 offspring that disperse from the natal burrow at 2 months. So you'll see kind of a pulse of pocket gopher burrowing activity in about the end of June. So we tend to have more calls kind of in the fall as well as the spring with our pocket gophers. The average lifespan is about a year old. And as I said, they have about 150 square yard range, and they are territorial. So you won't see huge piles of pocket gophers. You'll just see one usually, unless it's a mama with her babies. Some of the sign that you want to look for are the soil fans. So if you look on the left, it's kind of got a flat edge. And then on the right, it just sort of fans out. That's really indicative of a pocket gopher. So as they're burrowing underground, they're using their back feet to kind of kick that dirt out. And then they plug it so that predators can't come into the burrow. They are prey for any number of species, but badgers will really like them. Weasels can even get down in there and get them. And then a lot of times their burrow systems are dug out by canine species. So this is really indicative of pocket gophers. If I go to a property and I just see a big pile of dirt in the middle of some grass, I look for a plug and can usually find out that it's a pocket gopher. On the right-hand side, we have what we call casings. These are remnants of tunnels that pocket gophers built in the wintertime. Again, they are year-round, so what they often do is come up above ground once there's a snowpack, and they build these tunnels above the ground, but below the snow, and they will often line their burrow systems with soil. So it still feels like a tunnel to them. And then when the snow melts, what we see is that remnant of the casings. So I think they're about the only species I know of that does that at that size and that length. So it's pretty obvious that it's a pocket gopher when you find something like that. Here's what some of the damage looks like. Again, this is that tiny little yard that had a problem. You can see kind of in the center of her grass here, kind of towards the bottom left, you can actually see the hole, the pocket gopher hole. That pocket gopher didn't plug it. It left it as sort of a vent, I suspect. And you can see that very indicative fan shape soil mound. You can also just see bare spots in the grass where the pocket gophers have eaten the roots of the grass system and killed that grass. And then if you look over to the middle left, there's a big hole in the ground. And that was actually where the tree was. By the time we found it, it was just a standing stick. So those are very obvious signs of pocket gopher activity. So some of the damage that I'm seeing on an agricultural level, we are exemplified by this photo here. So here we have a fallow field, and then right next to it is a hop field. And then what I'm standing on is a water canal. So what's happening is the pocket gophers are in the fallow field where no one's managing them and nobody cares about them. But as they disperse each late summer, they go into that hop field and eat all of the hop roots and cause lots of damage. You can imagine it's a high monetary value of damage going on. The other problem is that they're burrowing into the infrastructure of this water canal and undermining the stability of that water canal. So when we took a look actually at the water canal, we found that it actually looked like Swiss cheese if you did a horizon layer of that canal, just from years of pocket gophers tunneling in, even despite management of the water canal operators. It's just hard to manage a species that you don't see on a daily basis because their burrow could be anywhere the only way you know is by finding that dirt pile. So let's go ahead and look at gopher management. Again, same idea. We have trapping and poisoning, habitat alteration, exclusion. But I added two things. One is fumigation. Because pocket gophers are often a little bit further out from houses and sheds, we might add fumigation to the list. And then also flooding, because they are predominantly underground. If you are in a situation where you can flood those holes, you can actually make those pocket gophers run away. So we're going to add those two things to the possibilities list. And we'll talk about them. The hardest thing to do to start is actually finding out where the pocket gopher mounds or the pocket gopher runs are. So what I always advise is you start by tamping down all of the mounds and then filling in the holes. And then you put a little pin flag, and a pin flag is just this little flag like you see on the left-hand side there. That kind of shows you where all the holes were that you filled up. And you can do this for ground squirrels too. So if you have a ground squirrel problem, pay attention right now, because it's the same idea. So you're filling all the holes, put the pin flag in, and then wait a day or two. And if that burrow is active, that the animal will have opened up the hole. So whether it's pocket gopher or ground squirrel, they'll open the hole, and then you know you're dealing with an active burrow. Otherwise, you could have had pocket gopher activity and the pocket gopher moved on, and you don't need to be treating a burrow that's not even active anymore. So we figure out what's active. And then once we figure out what's active, we have to dig down and find that burrow system. So on the left, you can see the top of the ground is this gravel layer. And what I've done was I found that plug where the pocket gopher is, and I went back about 6 inches and just dug down, and you find the hole pretty quickly. If you're not sure which direction to dig once you are at the plug, you can use a probe. So I'm looking around my office for it, but it's, a rebar or a heavy nail. You can just push it down into the ground with a steady force, and when it hits that burrow, it'll thunk and drop down into the hole. Then you know you found that burrow system. So you can go back a few inches from the plug where that probe dropped into the ground and start digging. And within 6 inches down, you'll find that burrow system. Usually there's two, because you've bisected it. So now you've got a burrow going this way and a burrow going that way. Sometimes they can be at a turn. So it's really important to figure out which direction the burrow is and find both sides to that burrow system, because you don't know which side the pocket gopher is on, and you therefore need to trap both sides. So once you found that hole and you found that burrow system, you're going to use a trap. All pocket gopher traps are lethal traps. This one that I'm holding up, and hopefully you guys can see it, is a Maccabee trap. And if you can't see it, it's in the right-hand side photo. You can find some videos online to show you how to set this. I'm not going to set it while I'm talking to you, because I'll probably trap my finger off. But essentially, this is the dog, and this is going to come up underneath the trap and get set into this hole right here. These pinchers are what's going to do the damage. So these pinchers are set on a spring. When the pocket gopher hits this pan, the silver pan, it releases the dog, and then that spring releases and pinches. So it's collapsing the pocket gopher's chest cavity, but it's also piercing the organs. It's a very, very quick death for that animal. On a trapping scale, it's fairly humane. So the other positive thing about this trapping method is that you're not going to get anything else in this trap. This trap's going to go into the burrow, And the pocket gopher, feeling that air or sensing a disturbance in the force, essentially is going to hit that pan and get trapped. Sometimes if you can, as you can see on the right hand side here, we have a little wire attached to a rebar pole that keeps the trap and the pocket gopher from being taken by a dog or something like that that might take it and run away with it. So it's just a good way to keep your trap and not get your trap lost. It's also a great way to extract the trap if the pocket gopher triggers it but doesn't die. Like he triggers it but he doesn't get caught, he'll backfill it and pack it in. And so you want to be able to use that wire to kind of pull it out. Again, there's several different videos online that'll help you figure out how to set this. On my website, I have those video links, so we can get you to that website if you don't want to search from YouTube, then you can find that. Okay, so moving on, we can use poisons. Again, this is a really common strategy if you have a lot of pocket gopher activity or a large acreage of land. Maybe you are an agricultural producer, you have a couple acres or so, and you have a lot of activity. Say you stamp down all the pocket gopher mounds and like 75% of them are open and you're like, oh crud, now I've got like pocket gopher apocalypse in my yard. In that case, trapping is going to be a lot of effort. So maybe you will have to use poisons. There are several poisons that are good for pocket gophers. Again, these are highly toxic, and you can see strychnine is one of them. And I think everybody on this workshop understands that strychnine is highly toxic. The reason why we can use these highly toxic doses is because the toxicant is going underground. Remember, pocket gophers are foraging underground, so we can put grain bait down there and the pocket gophers will eat it. So, and it'll die fairly quickly. Again, fumigants are also an option because the pocket gopher activity is usually something that we associate away from our houses and our sheds. That being said, you want to check the label of these gases just to make sure that it is registered for use in and around suburban environments, or even some of these aren't even labeled for use in anything remotely like a corporate town, anything that has a boundary. So you have to be really, really careful that, again, that you're looking at the label and using it appropriately. So here's some of them. I'm looking to make sure I'm not jumping ahead too far. Okay, so here's some of an idea of what the pocket gopher burrow system looks like. And you can see here, there's the probe, and that probe is being used by the human to kind of push and dig into the ground to find the correct location for that bait. But then once we've got the location for the bait, we can use a really cool device that I'm going to hold up and show you. They're kind of expensive, but you can get them at your local farm store. If you've got a lot of acreage, this will be worth it to you. Here's the probe you've got, and if you look here, it's an opening in that probe. So once you use the probe to dig down and find that run of the pocket gopher, you're actually just going to turn this trigger, and it's going to release the dose of bait directly into that hole. If you don't have a probe, you can use a teaspoon or some sort of apparatus and put the measured amount into the pocket gopher mound manually. Just be really careful. Make sure, of course, you're using proper protective equipment like masks and gloves, and washing your hands and changing your clothes and all that good stuff to keep you safe. Let me go and put this back down. Another consideration is that a lot of these poisons can move through soil and water. So if you are close to a stream, close to a pond, again, you want to check the label and make sure it's safe to use near a water system. Similarly, if you are drinking well water, you want to make sure that that's not going to be affected by any of these toxicants into the water system. There are some non-lethal options. So if you are more of a resident that's experiencing gopher problems, perhaps because of your proximity to agricultural fields, you can use exclusion. These guys are fossorial, meaning underground. So we basically put our fences underground, and that can help exclude them. They're, I would say, like hardware cloth or mesh. Hardware cloth tends to be more stiff. When I say mesh cloth, I'm talking like this kind of stuff. This is a 1/4 inch square, and it's bendable. You can line a hole that you're intending to plant your trees in with this. And it hopefully will dissolve within a few years, so it should not bind the roots. Not dissolve, but disintegrate. And then commercially, actually, there are baskets that you can buy specifically to protect the roots for against pocket gophers. So if you have perennial shrubs or perennial vegetables that you want to protect, you can actually just plant them right into that basket and put the basket in the ground, and it's really effective. I will say you do want to put it a few inches off the ground, maybe 4 to 6 inches above the ground for those tree species, so that if pocket gophers are moving around underneath the snow, they still come against that wire in their tunnel system above the ground, and it still protects the saplings when there's 12 inches of snow on the ground. So you definitely want to go above ground a little bit. If you have persistent issues, you could always put some of that plastic cylinder protectant over your saplings in the fall, and that'll keep the pocket gophers from being able to damage that in the winter. A lot of people do that for voles as well. It's a really temporary exclusion fix. You can just wrap it in that plastic tubing, or if you have a larger tree, there's some adjustable plastic stripping that will wrap around the trunk, and you can protect your small trees and saplings in the wintertime with that stuff. And then in the spring, you just take it off, and then you don't have, it's not unsightly, it's not anti-aesthetic, but it does the job in the wintertime. So that's kind of cool. Let's see, make sure I'm not missing anything I wanted to say to you guys. Okay. For pocket gophers, the best results combine a bunch of strategies. Again, the goal is to be proactive. So you want to monitor for that damage activity, protect, particularly along the borders of your property. So be proactive in that you look at the property next to yours. So look ahead to see what problems may be coming into your property in the future, so you can plan ahead. So if you're seeing an agricultural field next to your property with a lot of pocket gopher activity, you can assume you're going to have some pocket gopher activity, and you can proactively work towards protecting your valued crops from that activity as well. Use the biology against it. So use the fact that it stays below the ground to put barricades below the ground. Again, with the trapping is quick and effective with these little Maccabee traps. There's other traps on the market. The Maccabee was patented in 1908, and it's still one of the better traps out there. We recently did a study of several traps, and for our soil and our species of pocket gopher, the Maccabee trap was the most cost efficient, meaning that it caught more animals per hour of time it took to manage those traps than some of the other traps out there. And you can get them at the local farm store. Just remember that pocket gophers are mostly active in the spring and the fall. So you want to be prepared in those seasons to do your proactive work. Do do most of your lethal control in the spring, and then you are managing for the breeding adults. If that's not possible because of snow or timing, you can do it in the late August and September. Then you are managing for breeding adults and juveniles. So you have more animals to deal with, but it still does the job. So I know that in Utah, timing can be really kind of tricky. A lot of these things, you can't have snow on the ground, but by the time the snow is not on the ground, the animal's already breeding. So it can be tricky. So luckily there is fall that you can handle some of these issues with. Okay, so are there any questions about pocket gophers, or did you think of any questions you had about voles before we move on to ground squirrels?
Not seeing any questions yet, but I do just want to let everyone know, like, these are all things that we have on the preserve, all these creatures that we've talked about. And you mentioned those kind of tubes around saplings, and that's something that we use a lot of these physical barriers in places like where we're planting trees or saplings, and found that to be pretty effective. So
yeah, I think a lot of people, the go-to is to trap and do poison, like quick, let's put some poison in the ground. But it's important to remember that those exclusion methods work really well if it's just an occasional problem. If it's just a small population or occasional animal traveling through in the fall, those exclusion methods work great.
Yeah, definitely that a lot of, I think a lot of people, jump to the kind of poison, and there's all these other options, and knowing that biology so that you're meaningful with your management and effective is super important.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I will go reiterate what I said with the voles, especially as we're going into the ground squirrel talk. Please make sure if you are going to go with a toxicant for below the ground use, again, let's just make sure that it's legal for use in Utah, but also that it's actually for pocket gophers. So if it's formulated for moles, it may not work on pocket gophers. And then you just have a lot of toxicant in your soil doing nothing. And that's something we want to get away from. I don't want to encourage a bunch of toxicants sitting in the soil. So if we can avoid that and be more targeted with our approach, that would make me happier.
We do have one question. If you have a raised bed garden, will lining the bottom with gravel or large stones be effective?
I have seen that question before, really, in different situations. And what I think is better is if you were to line that with this mesh. So get some hardware cloth or get this mesh and line it. I think that would work better, but certainly larger stones will keep the pocket gophers from wanting to go into your raised beds. And as long as they have someplace else to go, they would rather not dig through rocks. I have seen them burrow through gravel just fine. So I'm not sure that something the size of a pea gravel would work. It would have to be a larger stone. But I definitely think this mesh hardware cloth works really well.
All right. I don't think we have any additional questions.
Well, wonderful. All right. There, I see some chat. Is that?
I answered a quick question.
Wonderful. Okay, well then let's look at our last species, which is the Uinta ground squirrel. There are a lot of ground squirrels in Utah, and with a lot of different biology. So these ones are, I left these for last because they're the trickiest. We have California ground squirrels, which are larger. They're also called rock squirrels. They're larger. They live in the rocks, which is why they're called rock squirrels. But we mostly see their activity in southern Utah. If you've ever been to Zion and you've been on the river walk, those are the squirrels that are mauling you as you are going down your river walk. But then we have these smaller guys, the Uinta ground squirrels, the Paiute ground squirrels, and the Belding's ground squirrels in Utah. They're all little brown squirrels. So they're brown all over. They don't have a lot of distinguishing features other than the fact that they look like a squirrel. And luckily for us, I think we all kind of know what squirrels look like. They can be confused with Utah prairie dogs. So we're going to go over that in a second. If you are in an area with Beldings or Paiutes ground squirrels, you can use the information I'm giving you to do the same thing with those species. Just know that they are different species, so the timing of their biology is going to be a little bit different, but mostly the same. These guys grow a maximum of 15 inches long. If you're looking at the Paiute ground squirrel, they're more around 8 inches long. They're quite tiny, but generally brown with a short tail, kind of smaller ears, but the ears still can stick up above their head. Pointy nose, they don't really have whiskers, medium size eyes for the size of their head. Come on, slides. My slide doesn't want to work with me right now. There we go. So let's look at the Uinta versus the prairie dog. We do have several species of prairie dogs in Utah. I don't think in the area of the Swanner Nature Center we have any, but if you're watching from outside, you could have Utah prairie dogs, white-tailed prairie dogs, or black-tailed prairie dogs. All three of these are different species. So what you want to look for is with the Uinta ground squirrels, you've got the ears that are going to stick up above the head. That isn't necessarily the case with the prairie dogs. For the Utah prairie dog, if you look at the arrow, that's showing you a black kind of eyebrow. That is indicative of the Utah prairie dog. Also, Utah prairie dogs and other white-tailed prairie dogs also have this white chest or a lighter colored belly, whereas the ground squirrels are all one color. So if you can see here, it's a great photo. Their belly is the same size as or same color as their back. Unfortunately, in the spring, juvenile prairie dogs are about the same size as Uinta, Beldings, and Paiute ground squirrels. So if you are in an area where both occur, you need to be very, very careful that you've got the right species that you're treating, particularly if you live in an area with Utah prairie dogs, because they are a protected species. And if you lethally control them, you could be served a very hefty fine or some prison time. Black-tailed prairie dogs are not protected, and most white-tailed prairie dogs are not, although there's some pockets of white-tailed prairie dog populations that are conservation species. So just make sure you know what species you're dealing with before you start to do anything. So squirrels, unlike the pocket gophers and the voles, they are only active part of the year. So we are going to address them a little bit differently because we really have to time our management. And we can actually use the fact that they're active in the spring and summer to do some targeted management and not waste your time. So that is that's kind of why I put the arrow there. Like, this is sort of an indication that it's a ground squirrel because it's only active in the spring and summer. They do make extensive burrow systems like the pocket gopher, but they don't plug the holes. So you'll see tons of soil on the ground, but you'll see lots of openings, lots of mounds, because these guys live in colonies. So they have like a town of ground squirrels, just like a prairie dog. And so that's the difference. With a pocket gopher, it's just one animal, intermittent piles of dirt that are plugged. With the ground squirrel, it's lots of different holes with dirt that are not plugged, and you'll see a lot more animals. These guys are active during the day, so that you can see them, you'll see them actively. That's a really good way to identify that you've got a ground squirrel, is if you see them running around. You're not going to really see a pocket gopher running around it's less common. So in all of my work, I've never actually seen a pocket gopher above the ground, although inevitably someone will tell me that they have, and I can be jealous, and that's okay. So squirrels are eating green vegetation in the spring, and then towards the end of the summer, they're going to eat seeds to try to bulk up and get fat for hibernation. They've also been known to eat worms and other invertebrates, and that's okay, that's not weird. So basically, a squirrel's life consists of coming out of hibernation, eating a lot, getting fat, and then going back to sleep. So they breed in late February, early March, just depending on where in Utah they are and the snowpack. And then by late July, those males will already be asleep. We call that estivation. So estivation is when you go to sleep to avoid the heat of the summer. And then hibernation is where you're sleeping to avoid the cold and the lack of resources in the winter. So sometimes these males will estivate through the heat of the summer, maybe wake up for a couple more weeks to get fat again, and then go right into hibernation. The smaller sizes, so the females that have just weaned their pups and the juveniles, will go into hibernation a little bit later because it's harder for them. They've got to get enough fat to make it through the winter. They generally only have one litter per year. I get a lot of calls asking me if they have two. Is it possible to have 2 litters per year? Yeah, it is, but it doesn't really happen because of the timing of the food and the fact that those pups have to get fat enough to live through the winter. It just feels like all of a sudden there's more because there can be up to 9 pups per litter. And so when they come out of their burrows in mid-May, you can go from just seeing a couple of adult males running around to seeing the adult male, the adult female, and 9 pups. So you've magnified the squirrel population by 10, essentially. And so all of a sudden it's just crawling with ground squirrels. So I always advise try to do any sort of population level, so lethal control, in February, early March, to get it before the pups come out of the burrow and start causing their own damage, because then you've really got a problem on your hands. Depending on where you are and what you're doing, you can have a lot of different damage from ground squirrels, anywhere from them eating irrigation tubing, eating electrical tubing, cable wiring. They can come into your garden and just eat your fruits right off the vine. But then you can also have them burrowing along your foundations, which of course causes a lot more concern. And then there's the burrow systems and the fact that they make these mounds of dirt crush the grass and create these big bald spots in your grass. So that's kind of the damage and the sign that you'd be seeing. Similar to pocket gophers, we can consider fumigation and consider flooding in ground squirrel management. So for those of you paying attention, I didn't talk about the flooding in pocket gophers, but I will here in the ground squirrel. So I didn't forget. We're just going to do it one species at a time. Again, with these guys, got to make sure that you're reading the labels. I know I keep saying it, but it is a problem throughout Utah. I don't know how many times I've gone in and seen people using pocket gopher bait to manage ground squirrels. It's not going to work because ground squirrels feed above ground. They're taking the bait differently than pocket gophers that eat below ground. It's also a serious concern for non-targets because the bait formulation for pocket gophers is more lethal, knowing that it's below the ground. So you just have to be really, really careful that you check your labels. As I mentioned, we are going to use ground squirrel biology as a tool for their management because they're only active for like 5 months. So you really have to target this strategically, or you don't get the management that you are thinking you're going to get. So if you think you're going to do some trapping in September and all the animals are already in hibernation, then you've done nothing to solve your problem. So let's talk about our biology, and the best time to do the management for each time of the year. The way I look at it, you have 2 times of the year to manage things at a population level, so like at a colony level. You can decrease the birth rates, which means that you need to be doing some sort of lethal control before the breeding has occurred and those pups are born. Or you can increase mortality in the fall once everything's out and about. So let's talk about that strategy. So as I mentioned, ground squirrels breed from mid-February to early March. That means that the males are moving above ground. It's sort of what we call a scatter reproductive effort. So the males wake up and it's just every man for himself. They're trying to find a female that they can mate with. And then once mated, that female goes below the ground and starts nesting. So once that female's been mated, you're not going to trap her out because she's just below ground, nesting and getting ready to give birth. So during this time, it's the best time to do fumigation or burrow ripping. That's something we haven't talked about yet. So there are some commercial products on the market where you can use fumigation, and you can use carbon monoxide as well. I'm trying to think if I can talk about it. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a couple of slides specifically. There's very little green up, as we call it, so nothing's really growing mid-February into March. So you can bait. This is a great time to use baiting. If there's no snow on the ground, right? Because if there's snow on the ground, baiting is not really going to work. So you're going to remove them before they have time to have offspring. So then the population that comes up in the end of May is going to be lower. That's our goal. So poison page here, again, you've got some anticoagulants, the difascinone and chlorfascinone, that require multiple doses, and you can use them. Same precautions, they are lethal to other things that can get into them, so you want to use that judiciously. I think the most common method would be the zinc phosphides. And again, it's highly toxic, but they're using it on a grain bait that is formulated to be attractive to pocket gophers, or not pocket gophers, ground squirrels at this time of year. And then the fumigants that you'll see commercially on the market are phosphine gas, carbon monoxide, and potassium nitrate. So the potassium nitrate and the phosphine gas are just these cartridges you see here on the right-hand side. They always have some kind of funky name like the gopher gas or something like that. But if you read the label, you'll see that it is registered for use on ground squirrels as well as pocket gophers. And there's a heavy instruction list that will come with these. Essentially what you're doing is you're lighting the cartridge and you're putting it down into the burrow. Or in some cases, it's a tablet, like a Phostab or Phostoxin is one, where you put a dry tablet into the burrow system, and as that tablet reacts to the moisture in the soil, it turns into a gas, which asphyxiates the ground dwelling animal fairly quickly. In that situation, again, when you're using these toxicants, you're going to make sure that you're not around any developments anywhere where people can be asphyxiated. It's always a good idea to check to make sure you've found every single burrow and nothing is leading to a human structure. We did have a sad case a while ago of someone using some Phostoxin, and there was an open burrow by a shed, and it wound up killing a family of humans. So it can be pretty lethal. You have to use caution. The other thing out there is forced carbon monoxide, and that's really gaining some traction, particularly in our agricultural fields. This is just a picture of one of them called the Burrow RX. But there's another one called the Cheetah that basically just looks like a snowblower. And what it's doing is it's purposely creating a lot of smoke and carbon monoxide gas in that smoke, and you're going to put a hose down into the burrow system and just let the burrow system fill up with carbon monoxide. Don't get any funny ideas. You can't do this with just car exhaust. That's not registered or legal. I'd have a lot of people ask me if they can do that. Can they just put their ATV out there and tape up a hose and put it down the hole? Yes, it has been known to be effective. No, it's not an approved practice because we cannot be sure of the level of carbon monoxide that's going into that burrow system. So you may end up in a situation where you're inhumanely and prolonging the death of an animal versus letting it expire quite quickly. So with these things such as the Burrow RX and the Cheetah, it's a pressurized gas that's forcibly going into the burrow system to make sure it gets all the way through the burrow system in a level that's lethal and humanely lethal. We don't want animal suffering. I said that bait is good this time of year because nothing's greened up. So you can get some commercial baits at your feed store, your farm store, cow ranch, things like that. These baits are going to go into a bait box specifically formulated for grain bait. You can also get block bait and put them into the same bait stations that I showed you before. Here's kind of what one looks like now that I know you can see me. Okay, these are good for voles. If you change up the bait, they can be used for ground squirrels as well. Again, there's a key on it. Take that with you, then nothing can get in there unless they've got the key. So it does make it a little bit safer. So usually these are the anticoagulants where you need a couple doses in order to be lethal. And you put that into that green box and strategically place them in the areas where you know that the ground squirrels are feeding. Once things start to green up and there's other food for them to use, they're not really attracted to the grain baits, but you can use it again in the fall when they are attracted to the seeds. So think about your environment in the fall. Grasses have seeded out, there's sagebrush seed around. So it's only natural for the ground squirrels to want to be eating seed again. So this is another strategy. If you miss the opportunity to do it in the spring because of weather or timing, you can do it in the fall and it will work. Again, it is poisonous to most mammals. This is a situation where you want to make sure that there's no endangered species of small mammal in your area that could get into that tube and get a dose of that bait. Usually we're using them in an area where we know that ground squirrels are the only thing that can get access to that. Flooding is something that we used historically, and then it kind of fell out of favor because we don't have a lot of water in Utah. But agricultural producers used flooding to chase out pocket gophers and ground squirrels historically. And then they changed to sprinkler irrigation, and flood irrigation kind of fell by the wayside. So if you're in a situation where you can do some flooding of your yard or some temporary flooding, this could actually work. I've actually seen situations where if the pocket or the ground squirrels or pocket gophers are close to a human establishment, you can just use a garden hose and flood that system. Takes a little bit longer, but you can totally do that. So that is an option. It's not necessarily a lethal option either. It could just mean that that animal has to evacuate the area and find someplace else to be. So if you've got access to that amount of water, or if there's only 1 or 2 burrows in the area, that could be a very effective option for you. If you're going to continue to use it as a preferred method, that's something that you're going to need to use in combination with other methods, some other types of lethal control, because otherwise you're just going to be comical out there flooding your yard every other week. So in the summer, these squirrels are going to be eating the greens. until the greens begin to seed out, there's not really a whole lot of options once summer comes on, because they don't want your bait. And they're kind of, the moms are in the ground with their pups. So if you can wait till after the pups come out, then you can do some things like try to do baiting with seed in late July. But there is kind of like this end of May, June-ish period where poison baits are not going to be effective. The soil is also going to be too dry to use fumigants like phostoxin tablets. You could try the carbon monoxide during this time. However, the effectiveness of even carbon monoxide is going to be conditional to the moisture level in the soil. We have really, really dry soils in Utah, so sometimes it just kind of excludes the whole fumigation idea in June and early July. So really, once you kind of have to wait for a month or two towards the end of July to actually get some success again with the green baits. And then once fall comes, August, you can do some fumigation as well. Basically, once you get to mid-August, though, most of the animals are going to be below ground. They're going to start hibernating, and you've really lost your chance to do much control until February. One option that we haven't talked about yet is trapping. Trapping is a good option once those juveniles come out. So that's something that we've done some research on with Uinta ground squirrels. In that kind of awkward period where you can't really use fumigants, you can't really bait, but now you've got all these juveniles running about, and oh my gosh, what do you do, right? Or perhaps it's not even your yard, it's the neighbor's yard or the agricultural field nearby, and they're just coming in and doing damage. So this is something that can be done year round. Well, not year round, active season round, so February to August. But it is something that I like to recommend as an emergency in those summer months when you don't have other options, because it is labor intensive. This top picture you see here is called a tube trap. And that lever that his finger's on is actually the trigger for a snap trap, much like one of those Victor mouse traps. So that's going to push down the trigger. I recommend putting apples and peanut butter. Apples and peanut butter work for everything. So I put a little apple and peanut butter on the pan device. The squirrel goes through that tube and goes after that apple and peanut butter, hits the trigger, and it's a compression kill. So it on a spring-loaded release, it compresses that brown squirrel's body. The great thing about the tube traps is that it really makes that trap species specific. You kind of have to be a squirrel or something shaped like a squirrel to get in there and get at that apple and get that trigger. So it does kind of reduce the non-target danger. So this is really good if you are putting in a pasture with horses or putting in a pasture with cows. You can put this on the side of your pasture and feel a little bit safer about having a trap. In some areas, people have had a lot of success with this bottom trap. I think it's commercially called the Squirrelinator. I did not have success with this trap. I just could not get it to work to save my soul. But hypothetically, you would bait it and you can get the whole colony of juveniles into this trap. As you can see, it catches multiple animals at once. And that's really cool, except that you then have to find a way to lethally dispose of those caught squirrels. So you now have to find a humane way of dispensing the squirrels, such as shooting them, etc. So drowning is not an approved method. I have people ask me that a lot. You cannot take an animal caught in a live trap and drown it. It's not, well, you can if you want to, but it's not registered as a humane method of lethal control. So generally, wildlife control officers will be expecting you to lethally dispatch that animal through shooting. So I generally recommend, if you want to go with the trapping route, go with the lethal trapping route. There's not really a whole lot you can do with exclusion because it's a squirrel, and squirrels can climb, and squirrels can dig, and squirrels can eat through anything. But that being said, you can use that root ball mesh that's commercially available to protect any burrowing damage from the squirrels to your trees, to your shrubs. They're not going after the roots in particular. They're just burrowing and making their colony without care as to those roots. So that's where they can have some inadvertent damage to your saplings and your sagebrush or whatever your ornamental shrubs are. So you can use that mesh method where you line the root ball bowl with mesh, or you can go online and buy one of those prepared baskets and set that down in there. The other thing you can do is use some of that plastic wrapping that you can put around the saplings if you're seeing them do some bark damage, although that's not really, you don't often see that. So it's very hard to protect like garden vegetables and things like that from squirrel activity unless you have like a full-on cage over your garden, just because they can get over and under and through. So you're basically excluding via cage method, which is probably cost prohibitive for most people. But it is possible if you've got a lot of damage to, and you've got a lot of ground squirrels, you could do that in your raised beds in particular. And I think, let's see what else we got. So again, in the fall and the winter, animals are dormant. You're not really going to do anything. Baiting, trapping's out. Don't try to bait after you see the population go down in the fall. The population is not going down because the animals are dying. The population is going down because the animals are hibernating. So the bait is going to become ineffective before that animal actually finds it and eats it. So then you're just left with putting toxicants in the ground for no reason. So you don't want to do any baiting starting in, like, I would say late August, early September, or once you see that population fall off, stop any baiting. Some people ask me if they can use fumigants during this time. It's not really going to be effective because the animals are dormant. So their metabolism is going down and they won't process that poison the same way. So it may become inhumane in that it causes a lot of damage to the animal, but doesn't kill that animal and inflicts a lot of suffering. So we do not recommend using fumigants once the hibernation season starts in the fall. So you kind of just play it cool, lay low until next spring, and then you can start your management options then. So for ground squirrels, just keep in mind their biology. Your best strategies are February through July, but you could do some trapping in August. Your largest impact for your price and your labor is going to be February to March, where you try to get those males and those females before they start breeding. And then you're doing individual control, not population control. So you're spending less money and you're spending less time. So to conclude and allow you guys to have some questions about squirrels, damage management is going to be tricky in the backyards and public spaces because we have to think about exposure to non-targets. The best thing you can do to save time and money and be the most effective is to consider the animal's biology. If you have a low density of animals and rare damage, you can try some tolerance, try some exclusion, or maybe just some emergency quick lethal control. But if you've got a persistent problem, maybe you're just the sink surrounded by the source ag fields, then you're going to want to combine methods to try to do some non-lethal and lethal approaches for the best effect. You can call me at any time, leave me a message, I'll call you back. You can email me at any time. I actually love to help people identify damage, and I love to help people identify what animals they have in their yards. it's like animal CSI. I really do enjoy it. So please don't hesitate, especially with today's day and age. Everybody has a video on their phone. It's very easy for you to FaceTime with me and just take me out to your yard and show me what you're experiencing. And I'm more than happy to help. The QR code that you're seeing will link you to a survey. That survey also has extra space for you to ask me any questions. And in case I didn't get to anything specifically, or you have a specific concern that you want more information on. And with that, I'll take any questions you have about ground squirrels.
It looks like we have a lot of questions.
Coming in.
I have one. Given the fact that we have a lot of snow cover, like in the peak time when we're supposed to be controlling them, does that mean that baiting is not a great option for us unless the snow melts early?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of success in the spring, to be honest. A lot of my research with the county agents over here in Beaver County has been trying to find a way to do some baiting for ground squirrels in the event that we can't get there in the winter. Because if there's snow on the ground, it's not effective. And we have some methods for agricultural producers, but unfortunately you have to have a pesticide applicator's license in order to use them. So the average person doesn't have.
But you could call a professional, like a pest professional during that time. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So for questions,
Jen said that they saw ground squirrels last spring around March 17th. I saw one last week on the preserve, just as an FYI to everyone, like they're starting to wake up. That one was maybe a little bit earlier, but that's why the timing of this talk is now, because they're starting to wake up. But we had a question from Vicky. Do ground squirrel populations vary along multi-year cycles like the voles do? Do they have those kind of boom and bust years?
They certainly can. It's not going to be as dramatic as a vole. They have a longer lifespan, and they are also only reproducing once a year, whereas a vole can be reproducing like once a month, essentially. So you just have that potential for that exponential growth with voles. That being said, all rodents can have an up cycle and a dramatic increase, but then you'll see a decline. But it's more based on moisture levels and plant levels of the year before. So they can all die out because that whole generation will die out because there's just not food or water available, and then you'll see kind of a lower population. So it does take them 1 or 2 years to have that population boom, whereas with voles you can see the population boom within a couple months.
Are outdoor cats effective in catching and control, and are they big enough for ground squirrels?
That is a great question. So I've always supported agricultural producers that have neutered barn cats, so non-reproductive barn cats. Yeah, they are good. They are not going to remove the problem, but they can help you as one of your management options. So they are great. They are something that you can have if you are an agricultural producer, or maybe you're managing a greenhouse, something where you have that persistent problem. It's never a bad idea to have a neutered cat, but please make sure that it's neutered and it's had all its shots.
I believe that Best Friends also has feral cats that they will alter, like neuter or spay, and then give to agricultural producers too, or if you have like a barn.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something like I'm not going to go out and get a barn cat just for my backyard. There's more effective ways to handle that situation, because they are going to eat everything else too. But if they are given a consistent source of voles or a consistent source of ground squirrels, then they, like I said, they're not going to alleviate the problem, but they can help you as one of the tools in the process.
We had a question from Mary. What are the ground squirrel's positive qualities to the ecosystem?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of positive qualities to ground squirrels. I'm really glad you asked that question. Ground squirrels and pocket gophers and prairie dogs, they till up the soil. They are creating a restorative process of minerals in the soil by their tilling activities. That's one. Their burrows, when they vacate them, are used by invertebrates, lizards, reptiles, other mammals, burrowing owls, and they can be reservoirs for moisture so that they can actually become footholds for plants to establish because the moisture reservoir in their burrowing system. And that's just the habitat. They are actually a baseline diet for a whole host of medium-sized predatory mammals, anywhere from weasels all the way up to bobcats and mountain lions will forage on them. And then you've got the whole host of hawks that use them as a prey base and owls that use them as a prey base. So they're incredibly important to the ecosystem.
Definitely. We see where we see a lot of podguts on the preserve, we see badgers, we see all kinds of predators. I have seen a sandhill crane go after a podgut, so they're super important food source for so many creatures.
Yeah, there's some people that would argue that they're even keystone species, meaning that without them creating that habitat, you would lose an entire ecosystem structure because they are creating a food, they're creating habitat, they're creating soil rejuvenation. Their feces and urine is fertilizing the soil. So they're incredibly important and necessary in the environment.
We had another question that I think kind of maybe ties into the trapping about one-way doors. So this person has ground squirrels in their garage walls that hibernate there, and they want to install a one-way door for them to leave. But when would be the best time to do that when maybe babies wouldn't be trapped in there or are able to escape?
That's a great question. So if they're using it for hibernation, you should be able to put a one-way door on in February. And as they leave hibernation, they'll exit through that one-way door and they won't be able to come back in. So that's generally the best way. And even if they were attempting to use it as a nursery later, once that mama leaves to breed or whatever, she won't be able to get back in. So that kind of negates that whole issue. So I would suggest now, like right now, probably might be a little bit too late. If they're still there, do it right now. But any other time, I would say in February, just be prepared in February. And then once they're out, figure out how they're getting in and use some exclusion to keep them out. And so you can call me and I can tell you some exclusion ideas, but the hardware cloth will keep over a hole, will help them out. Some people have used spray foam insulation. It's really gritty and the squirrels don't want to chew at it. And so that's a really quick patch. If you don't have time to do something extensive, you can get them out and then quick do some spray foam insulation to make sure they can't get back in. And then as you have time, do a more permanent solution.
Great. There are a couple of older historic buildings on the preserve, and we have the same issue. We aren't living in them, so we don't maybe have the day-to-day interactions like this person did, but they are starting to stir for sure in those walls.
Yeah, just the females have to come out eventually to either mate or get food before they start giving birth. So, I mean, once they're out of there, they're out. But now is the time.
Yeah. We have another question from Mary, who it sounds like probably has a beautiful garden and is wondering if there are plants that Uinta ground squirrels might not eat, or that are maybe a deterrent. Columbines are getting eaten, and I'm sure super tasty.
Ooh, you know, I might have to get back to you on that, Mary. I don't know of any off the top of my head. Um, Off the top of my head, all I can say are that they're going to avoid plants that are high in tannins and alkaloids. So things like Mormon tea would not be something that they want to eat. But as far as flowering plants, I might need to look into that. As I'm saying that, I'm thinking lupin. Lupin is can be poisonous, so to other animals. So perhaps lupin, I'd have to look into that. But that is one. And foxglove, and oh, what's that other one? Larkspur. But those are all also toxic to like cattle. So if you've got goats or sheep or cows, you don't want larkspur or lupin. But if you don't have to worry about agricultural animals, they're very pretty flowering plants that probably would not be eaten as much. But that's just off the top of my head. I could probably research and find a few more.
Thank you. Those seem like great options and beautiful. I
Yeah.
love like silvery lupin is a native plant that we have on the preserve, and is toxic to livestock, but is a great option for a native garden and is pretty low maintenance as well.
Yeah, and perennial, which is always it's always a bonus.
Yeah, always bonus. Keeps coming back. You don't have to pay for it again. Let's see if we have some other questions.
There's one about Chihuahuas chasing ground squirrels and concern about whether or not they can bite your dogs.
Ooh,
Yeah, they could definitely bite the Chihuahua. Yeah.
Anything with a mouth can bite.
Yeah, they're definitely going to bite your Chihuahua. That being said, they don't normally carry rabies. So you probably don't have to worry about that with your Chihuahua. One caveat is that prairie dogs, and to a lesser extent, some of these other small mammals, can carry plague, and that can be transmitted to your dog. So you want to be careful with any interactions that way. And certainly if you've got a dog chasing ground squirrels, putting bait near their holes where the dog is probably not recommended.
What is your opinion about commercially available rodent repellents? So maybe some kind of repellent versus poison.
Yeah, I have never experienced positive results with repellents. My caveat to that would be, if it is a localized thing that you're trying to protect, like say your garden beds, you might find success with those repellents. The thing with the repellents is that they are going to degrade rapidly in our climate. So the sun's going to break them down really fast. The dry air is going to break them down really fast. And then if it rains, they're washed off. So I feel like they're a lot of labor. But if it's something that you need a short-term fix on, or something that's really dear to you, that you need to protect, that you can get to on a regular basis, and that you can handle on a regular basis, I think that you could find some effect using repellents. But on that note, I have some folks have started doing some research on the ultrasonic repellents. So it's a noise-based repellent, and you kind of stake it into the ground, and it creates sort of a subsonic vibration that is said to be annoying. And I have seen limited success in that as well. Again, it's going to be relative to the soil type that you have. If you have rocky soil, those sound waves are just going to bounce off the rocks and not penetrate through the soil. But if you have nice tillable soil that's attracting your ground burrowing animals, then that's something that could also have a limited use. I don't read a ton of data on it. So I don't see it being used a lot, but that is another possibility.
Great. Yeah, we have used some of those above ground repellents, but it is for things like saplings, but it is like something that you have to do fairly often and pay attention. And along with some physical barriers, we've had some success, but
Yeah.
it is a bit of a labor to do that.
Yeah, it's not something that you're just going to run out, throw the repellent on, and it's going to work magically. But yeah, like you're saying, if you're combining it with some other efforts, you could have some success.
I have one more. There's one more question about the live trapping with the squirrelinator. Those are typically for people to live trap and then shoot them, right? Relocating is not a big thing, or did I mishear that?
So it's illegal to relocate them.
Okay.
So you're not going to be relocating them. Nuisance wildlife control officers will use them because then they actually have a carbon monoxide chamber that they can put them in to lethally dispose of them. Obviously, we don't have that, so that's going to be a harder choice for us. But I have recommended it in a couple of occasions effectively where somebody had a family of ground squirrels under their deck. They had one of those decks where there was only like 6 or 8 inches of clearance, and the ground squirrels had gotten into the deck. So what they were able to do was live trap the ground squirrels out and then immediately exclude the deck through flashing and hardwire so that the ground squirrels couldn't get back in. And in that case, they didn't mind releasing the ground squirrels and letting them go someplace else. It was just like it was kind of like a one-way door. Like they needed to get them out so they could use the exclusionary methods.
I think that's all our questions. That was a.
Did you get the 4-part one about the start of the mating season delayed?
Got. Oh yeah, we have one that's a couple different parts. Let's see.
Okay.
We can wrap up. Thanks. These are some really great questions. So thanks for answering them all so informatively. Is the start of mating season delayed given the snow coverage and our high elevation, maybe compared to different places in the state?
So it can give or take a week, but it won't be delayed too much. And that's where the species differences are. So the Beldings and the Uinta and the Paiutes are going to have a week or two differential on when they start. So you can definitely see that if there's a couple feet of snow on the ground, you're pretty safe. But once it gets down to a couple inches, those males, it's spring, they're ready for action. So they're going to come looking for those females.
Yeah. Another kind of part on this question, are electric fences effective for keeping podguts or any of these species out of gardens or areas?
They're not really going to keep out the squirrels and the pocket gophers. What you could kind of get a kick out of using them for excluding your gardens and things like that for ground squirrels. So if you've got something buried 6 or 8 inches deep, so they're not going to go under it, and then you have it electrified, if they try to climb over it, they're going to get an electric shock. I could definitely see some entertainment value there. So no, I definitely think that is a clever idea. I think that could possibly work.
Cool. Put that.
You just have to make sure you get down into the soil so they can't bury under it.
Go right under it. And any thoughts on measures one can take to discourage podguts from chewing on wood siding? Do you think that that's podguts? Is that behavior that they exhibit, or maybe another creature?
I don't often see ground squirrels doing that unless there's already a crack or something in there that they're attracted to for a habitat. I'm not sure that that's a ground squirrel issue. that would take some monitoring to see. That being said, yes, I mean, this is my handy dandy go-to for squirrels. So if they're chewing on some siding, if you want to put this up temporarily, they're not going to want to chew through this, so they'll probably go someplace else. It's, they don't generally chew siding because they're usually wanting to go underground. The fact that if it is a ground squirrel, the fact that it's chewing on siding may be an indicator that you've got bugs in your siding. Something that
That's
would
fun.
attract them.
Yeah.
You already partially answered this question, but there aren't any like garden vegetables that are not interesting to park vets, right? Because anything we would want to eat, they're going to think it's really tasty.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
They like their vegetables.
Yep, pretty much. I will say there's things that are more attractive. So like gourds, watermelons, things with a high water content are more attractive.
Good to know. Well, I
I
think
think we
that's
got all our questions.
all our questions. That was such a great presentation. I learned a lot. And we had just such a great engagement in people interested in this talk, all these awesome questions. And I did put a link to the survey in the chat if participants are able to check that out. Otherwise, it will be going out in an email tomorrow with some information and the recording if you ever want to refer back to this. We'll also put everyone's contact info here for questions, and just thank you all so much. And thank you, Dr. Fry. That was just so great.
Yes,
thanks.
thank you very much.
Thank you guys for the invitation. So I love to talk about small mammals.
Great. Well, you've got the people to talk to, and we'd love to have you someday in the future in person. So
Yes.
Everybody keep an eye out for future talks, walks, workshops. We've got a lot of awesome stuff coming up. So thanks so much for spending your evenings with us.
Of course. Thank you guys. We'll see you later.
Okay. Good night, everyone.